All right, I guess we'll start. So this is our second session of Lockdown Film School. And in our session today, we're going to be talking about cinematography. And we have two amazing guests with us. We have Lutes, who has done a lot of things, including Firecrackers, Mouthpiece, which was our #3 film of the decade. And Disappearance of Clifton Hill is, I think, your most recent thing. And also the latest season of Anne with an E. And then we have Ashley Connor also, who has done a lot of things as well that are really wonderful. But you might know her for, she's done a lot of work with Josephine Decker, including on Madeline's Madeline, and also did not Disappearance, my goodness, Miseducation of Cameron Post. So we're really excited to have them both here today.
Excited.
Thanks for having us. And I'm a fan of your work, Ashley. I've always watched, I've always followed Josephine's films, so I've seen your work for quite a few years.
Well, the feeling is mutual.
Oh, thanks.
So I guess we should probably explain the ground rules, which is that for the people who are watching, there is a tab at the bottom with chat and Q&A. So in chat you can chat, but if you want to ask like a specific question, we are doing like a round of questions from our audience at the end. So in the last kind of 15 minutes of the live stream. So if you want a question to be considered for that, just go to the Q&A tab and type it in, and we'll store those for the end. Cool. So I guess we'll get started. And just as a broad question to start it off, I was going to ask, what drew you to cinematography as a profession? How did you get into doing this?
Do you want to go first, Ashley?
Sure. I feel like, I was a movie lover. I knew that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I decided, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I wanted to get as far away from LA for film school as possible. So I went to Ithaca College in upstate New York. And really that school has like an emphasis on working with 16 millimeter. You learn film on a Bolex. I did hand processing. I cut my own films on Steenbecks. And they're kind of like the last school who really followed through with those principles. But once I got to film school, I quickly realized I enjoyed the visuals of filmmaking far more than the other aspects. And it just kind of fell together. It's, a passion. Yeah, that's basically how I kind of got started into cinematography.
Yeah, I think I had a bit of like a similar, I didn't always know that it was cinematography, but when I decided to go to film school, there was sort of an interview process that was like, in the program I went into, only 5 out of the 15 people would direct their films each year. So they asked like, will you be disappointed if you don't get to direct a film? And I kind of realized like, no, I actually want to do this thing. And it kind of became clear as I started shooting everyone's films. But yeah, I was sort of open to it, I guess. I always was doing still photography as a teenager, and then theater. And I remember having like a theater moment where our theater teacher made us do the entire production, and I was in charge of the lighting. And I was like, oh, imagine lighting outside of a stage. Like that kind of gave me also a little spark, I think.
And I'm just like interested in, I guess it depends on whatever project you're working on, but in terms of your prep process, if you get a script, how do you start kind of approaching the material and breaking it down visually and working on it before you start shooting?
I think for me, I approach every project with a very open visual mind. I think directors are smarter than we give them credit for. Just kidding. For them, I'm always like, I always approach it, how do they approach their film? How do they envision their film? And from that, I sort of extrapolate certain visual concepts to kind of bolster their original vision. And for me, it's, you know, prep. I love prep. I work with directors who don't like prep. I work with directors who love prep. I work with people who want to storyboard, who will not even shot list, you know, but that's what's exciting. Every single director and every single process is very different. I think working as cinematographers, it's our duty, purpose to sort of be capable, almost like a therapist, of understanding the director on this other level, to kind of get into their mind and help empower them through prep and so hopefully, like, you know, it's as much about learning about their personality as it is about their visual style.
Yeah, I did another talk recently about specifically prep, and I was kind of like thinking about it and thinking about vocalizing the points of it. I was very like, oh yeah, there's an element of even just spending time with a director and kind of realizing like what their personality is like when they're like hungry or irritated or whatever. Like knowing those things before you're on set is kind of nice and kind of gives you a little bit of a head start. But I really like trying to take a script and working with the director to go through beat by beat and have them and I talk about the emotional points before going into it, like with shots or visual specifics, and then kind of come and do another round of the script where you start getting into more like how is the emotional core, how do these like moments, these feelings from each scene, how can we then put that into the visuals and how we attempt to shoot it. But it's true what you're saying. It's like everybody is so different. So you're kind of at the mercy of them a little bit in terms of the approach. But that's the one thing I try to really push for is like, I need a couple days to sit down with the director and like fully go through the script. And my scripts will be like one side of it will be like just kind of them breaking down what pieces are emotionally important or like keywords of a feeling or a tone in those moments, as opposed to like wide shot, you know, or colors, or, you know, there's sort of the bigger overarching things that I hope like seep into my brain so that when everything changes on set, you kind of have that at the core somewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly like, I was talking to a group of film students and I was like, you know, it's very rare now, or at least for like the first 10 years of me shooting stuff, it's like you don't have the time, you don't have the money, you're constantly changing on the fly and having to adjust to the, you know, just working on set and sort of what obstacles come up. So if you can always find the emotional core of why a scene exists, it just makes it so much easier to understand on the day when you have to pivot to be like, okay, the only thing important here is X. But so yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering about how you play into the location scouting. So when you're in a location scout, if you are part of the location scout, what do you think that you're looking for that's different from, say, what a director or a production designer might be looking out for?
Windows, light sources. I mean, for me, you know, you kind of have to put what you're working on into a couple different categories. You know, it's like your budget limits you. So you kind of have to view it from a budgetary standpoint, unless your budget is large, and then you can kind of freely think about certain things. But a lot of it, if you're walking into locations and you kind of have to work with what you have or like alter it slightly, it's about window direction, how many windows are, what's the space like, is there enough space to shoot in? I mean, there's obviously like magical questions of like space and why you choose locations, but you know, I think that's sort of a collaboration between everybody. But for me, I'm always like, what's the load in like? What's the load? Like, can we get in here? Can I get a dolly up here? Can I get the tools that I need to tell the story? Is it on a fifth story walk up? Because I'm going to say no, you know? Can I get a lift outside? They're very practical things that, you know, also cross my mind, as well as like beautiful location.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening to like another chat this afternoon between production designers and DPs, and it kind of came up, which I was in agreement with, of also it's like walking onto a set and feeling like you have more than one option in the space. You know what I mean? Like you're looking for inspiration and you're looking for different ways to cover and approach a scene, and you don't want to be like handcuffed, like, okay, here's the one thing that looks good about this space. But you're right. It's like very dependent on budget and things as well. I know with like, I kind of come from when it's super low budget and you are going to be spending a lot of time at a location, you really need to get the right location, because there's not a production designer who can totally redesign that, because you don't have the budget usually, if it's something really low budget.
Yeah.
So I feel like locations are important to get the right bones.
Yeah, it's always me pulling the production designer over and being like, now, can you actually do this to this location, or is this going to be a me problem when we down to it? Because you're not usually on set.
And what's your budget for curtains?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of curtains.
Yeah.
One thing I always wonder is like, how do you decide what aspect ratio goes with a particular film? What do you think particular aspect ratios lend to particular stories?
I'm kind of, well, I was, I kind of like have some rules or approaches, and one of my like rules has always been like, don't go anamorphic or widescreen unless you really fucking mean it. And I feel like people these days don't mean it enough. They think inherently that 235 means cinematic, so that's sort of, not that you can't, not that I wouldn't shoot that, but for me, I really question directors on like what they think. That's a word that gets tossed around so much. It's like, what's cinematic? We don't want our film to not be cinematic. And I'm like, anything is cinema. I can watch a VHS copy of the worst version of a Fassbinder film and still understand like his point of view. So for me, it's really about questioning like why people have these inherent tendencies. And then it's like, but what are you trying to accomplish with your film? Aspect ratios to me are subconscious ways of bringing your audience into a certain viewpoint, a certain feeling. The way you frame faces usually is how I approach it. And that's sort of the question that I like to have with them. I'm like, what do you want? And why do you think like that, they always get nervous that they're picking the wrong aspect ratio. And for me, I'm like, I can get down with anything. I love it all. I just want it to make sense for what the story is.
Yeah, I think similarly, it is funny how often people are like, but we want it cinematic, so it has to be widescreen. And you're like, yeah, it's not always the case.
Yeah.
But it's funny because, I did this film Firecrackers, and we talked about the aspect ratio a lot, and we like really did not want it to be widescreen because of like the sort of artifice of cinema-ness to it. I don't know. It was like something about it being 16:9 felt like a little more real or natural or something.
Yeah, and I think now, I do take into account how people view things. So if I know that the project is going only online, or what the function of the project is, I really want to be like, how are we really making audiences feel when they're going to watch this on Netflix or on whatever? It's like, again, not to say that you can't watch something in 235 or 4:3 and not get a good sense, but I think purpose is important when talking about these things, and not just defaulting to something because you think, it's like people thinking that Kubrick shoots wide or like anamorphic. And the reality is he did it once, I think. He's more like Academy ratio. So it's like, he's actually not as wide as people think he is. But they always mention that, and I'm like, no, he didn't.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of that, you mentioned like shooting for the screen that people are going to be watching it on, and both of you have shot for TV. So could you just talk about like the difference in approach to a TV project versus like a film project?
I'll let you start, Catherine.
I mean, each TV project is also different. So it's not really like a one size fits all thing there either. And with an E was interesting because I came in the third season, so they'd already kind of established some rules, although they were very open to changing the rules. The creators, they were not like, you have to follow any specific things. But it was definitely a different process for me because as we were saying before, like I really like prep, and with that show, I shot the entire series. So there's not a lot of time for prep. Once you're past the second episode, you're just going, and there's just directors coming in and you're just doing it. You start to rely a lot more on the crew around you and them taking control over, certain things I would micromanage maybe on a smaller budget or on a feature. And things like locations, like when you're asking about location scouting, I had to think about like, oh yeah, I wasn't going to some of those locations. And I had people doing that for me. And then I'd have to be like, look for these things, or they'd come report back to me and they'd show me pictures and I'd have to be like, where is the sun? Because the sun is in the wrong place. We can't shoot here all day. They were going to be like crazy hot sun all day. So those things were like an interesting change. But overall approach, I mean, I think I try to do it similarly. Like you want to come from storytelling. I'm always like a little bit pushing for not over covering. But that's hard sometimes. With TV, people want a very standard way of telling the story sometimes. So it's a battle a little bit. Does that answer the question? I'm like, wait, what was the question again? How to approach for television? It's interesting because the show I was on that we were starting when we got shut down, I feel like we were really trying to be like, we're going to go at it in a non-traditional coverage kind of way. And I hope that that's what actually happens when we get to finally shoot it.
Yeah, I mean, I think TV is really hard. And, for me, I like, my ADD gets engaged. I like doing a project, living in a world, working really hard on it, and then moving on to something else. I like inhabiting different spaces. And so TV for me, like Broad City, I shot the final season, and I'd shot Abby in a movie, and when they kind of approached me, I was like, okay, this is exciting. It's the final season. I know it's not going to go on because, you get into this idea that people want you to come back all the time. And for me, but it had like an end date, but it was fun to like inhabit their space. And like you said, like you kind of know they're not hiring me to like revamp the show. I can bring ideas, but I know the look and I understand the look. Pilots are a bit different, but I don't know. I mean, TV repetition is kind of God there. Like they once you build the world and you have the world, you can explore that world, but they want that world to kind of be the same. So I don't know what my TV point is here.
I know. It was interesting for me, like being on big sets and that kind of world of, there's a version of TV where people would establish how a certain set looks, and every time you return to it, you would like basically do the same thing. And I don't have that in me. So I feel like I was driving my technicians crazy because we would go back to a set and they'd be like, so this, and this. And I'd be like, no, let's try like a totally different thing this time.
Yeah, which sometimes goes over well. And sometimes they're like, we only look at this location like this. And you're like, oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Love it. It's a great location. Yeah, but TV is hard for me. I don't know why. I think I found that I like TV up to a point, but movies are where my heart is.
We interviewed a cinematographer, Jakob Ere, a couple years ago, and one thing that always stuck with us was that he described a cinematographer's role as breathing with the actors. And I was just wondering, first of all, how do you approach working with actors, and whether that statement resonates with you, which I suppose is tied into like whether you guys operate or not.
It's interesting. I want to hear his take on TV because didn't he do Chernobyl?
Yeah.
Which is beautiful, which is like where I look at TV and go, oh, right, you can do it. And it looks amazing. And it feels great. Like a show like that felt amazing. But breathing with the actors, I mean, it depends. I think, yeah, on if you're operating for sure, responding to them and also not like handcuffing them to a plan that you've come up with, you know, having the actors be a creative part of the process is kind of something that I've learned where, you know, when you come up with a shot list with director, you can't always walk on set and be like, this is what's going to happen, because the actors have to also weigh in on how that feels and you have to respond to that too. Again, like Firecrackers was very breathing with that. I like that saying. But it was so much about a dance and being like wide lens close to them and moving with them, was super intimate. Actually, by the end of the film, I felt like I really knew them and how they moved, and they knew me, and like we were really responding to each other in spaces, and they would know how, especially in that film, they were non-professional actors. So by the end, it was like they understood how to get to the right spots and where I was going. And we really were doing the dance, you know. It's kind of amazing when it works like that.
Yeah, I mean, I always call it a pas de deux with the actors. And for me, it's like, you know, not every film is like this, but I think my more exciting work, like Madeline's Madeline or Campos, whatever, you know, when you really lock into an actor and you lock into her performance and you're not just a machine anymore, you're a living person who they can kind of feel an energy of, you know, that to me is the most exciting part of our jobs. I'm also not a DP who's like, you must hit this mark at this point or the light's gonna look like garbage. I'm a little bit more like, move where you want, baby. You feel it out in the scene and then I'll adjust to what your instincts tell you, because for me, performance and story are key. You know, I'm there to service those things. But yeah, I think, you know, I love actors. I like love actors too much. It's like if they're crying, I'm crying into the eyepiece. But I find that when I'm not operating, I like being really close. I like being in on the action. I like really bearing witness and being capable of adjusting mid-shot. And that can be on sticks, it can be a handheld, it doesn't matter. But for me, I'm there to like feel the emotions that are coming and be instinctual. So for me, it's like, it is about being present and activated. And it's like, you know, if I'm shooting 2-camera cross coverage, fine. Like, you know, I need to like look at a frame, but I find single camera more engaging for me because I can really be present.
Yeah, it's interesting you saying like that you're not a like hit the marks person, because I'm similar, and I feel like I can kind of thrive off that sometimes and find the more interesting composition when it isn't as like, here's where you're going to go and that's the exact frame. It's like when there's the spontaneity to it, you find the happy accidents that are beautiful, and it keeps you on your toes to kind of like find that exact frame that you lock into.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure our first ACs bless them as saints, you know, but I'm not a difficult person, or I am a very difficult person to pull for, because I am always like, ooh, and then I felt something and I go down, and if they're not paying attention, it's like,
yeah,
you know, not like I yell on set, but my wrath, I'll be like, I'll shake the camera and be like, focus.
Feel it.
Yeah.
Catherine, we wanted to ask you about, because we interviewed the director and the cast of Mouthpiece last year, and they told us a story about how you always wanted, especially in the flashback scenes, to be shooting through something, and one day you like rubbed your lip gloss onto the lens so that you had something to shoot through. And it just made us wonder, like, I wanted to ask both of you if you have like stories like that of ways you found like creative solutions to problems to get the image you want on the day.
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking about Madeline. I like, I don't know how to say it properly, but And I feel like there's similarity in Mouthpiece in that there's like a lot of textural, like it feels very textural and visceral and sometimes dirty, and like the beauty comes from that. And there's things that are kind of feeling like you're in the person's head because you're kind of playing with that image a little bit. So I'm like curious to hear what you were doing. But yeah, for Mouthpiece, I don't know, I had like a bag of tricks that I like carried around that were, I don't know, prisms and mirrors and things. And then I had some glass cut for filter shape that I would put in. And the original plan was that I wanted to like paint on it. But I couldn't quite master that, and we didn't really have the time because it would have been so finicky to be trying to do that on the day for each frame and whatever. So often, yeah, it was like lip balm, which is like the cheap old trick where they were like Vaseline on the lens, but
the lips of God, goddess to the lens.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I studied experimental film. It's kind of like my first big love. And for me, I'm always encouraging of people just building something and trying something and fucking shit up. And for me, it's like, it is about the friction. It is about creating a dirtiness. It is about imperfections. I can usually tell when a post effect happens, like they're trying to do some cool lens shift thing. But for me, there's no better feeling than like a practical effect. So yeah, I'm very much like always tinkering with some sort of practical effect. Like I think I have some like fishing line square thing that I've been building these days. See, but you know, I feel like you can, similar to visual effects and things like that, I feel in camera you can kind of feel the hand more, and it allows for more accidents. And so, you know, what I do, anyone can do. Anyone has access to any of the things that I've ever done with like a frame. It's just, I like, a lot of students are like, what did you do? How did you do it? And I'm like, it's just more fun if you like go and mess around yourself and find your own path, because you can copy what I do or what other people do, or you can kind of find your way through it and experiment until you find something that feels like an honest action for you, you know?
I was going to ask on the technical side, like, could you walk us through what cameras you've worked with and which you like most, and sort of how you choose what camera to work with on each film?
Done them all. You know, I'm not so tech heavy, and I don't say that as like an embarrassing thing. I say it as like, I just don't really care. I like the Alexa family. I like the workflow. I think that the image comes out looking the way usually that you wanted it to look. And it's just like an easy, it's operator friendly. The design is always great. And I like the inherent qualities of the image. That's not to say you can't get the same image with another camera. It's just, I found that their workflow is one that I like, and I like, you know, their accessories. But you know, it goes across the board. I feel like, especially when 4K became a TV mandate, it's like suddenly you're using a Venice, and then I'm using an LF for TV, and then you're doing all this 4K nonsense. But for me, the movies I shot that went to Berlin were on a DSLR, and people were shocked that they were shot on DSLRs. And I was like, it just doesn't matter. If you use the tool correctly, you can shoot on anything, and it can be emotionally honest and present and visually beautiful. People just have this idea that like cameras make the beautiful images, and it's actually the people behind the cameras that do that.
Yeah, I'm similar to you, is that I'm not a super technical person, and I also have a terrible memory for stuff like that. So kind of once I've done it, I forget a lot about the technical side of it, and I just keep the image and the emotion of it in mind. But similarly, Alexas are a very easy pick up and go and things feel right kind of camera. I wish I could say film, but like it's not happening very much these days. So
If only.
yeah.
What about lenses? How do you pick a lens to work for a particular project?
I don't really prescribe to any like lens package as being my go-to lens package. I think for me, I try to get directors to describe visual indicators of how they'd want their film to feel or look, and that can be as abstract or concrete as they want it to be. And then I sort of take those words and extrapolate like a series of lenses and then try to test with them those lenses. And I don't do like full tests. I'm not like looking at every single part of the lens. I'm just like, emotionally, what do you feel when you see this on the camera? And what do you feel when you look at an image? And does that make you feel like it's your movie? You know, I can get down with dirty old lenses. I can get down with master primes. Doesn't matter. But for me, it's like, I really want a director to feel enabled by a lens set and enabled by the quality of the lens, or I don't know what that can mean and how it can function in a subconscious way. But yeah, research.
Yeah. I think I'm similar in it. And I mean, I did lean for a long time towards older lenses and wanting things to be a little softer, but it depends on the project. Like the last film I did, Clifton Hill, the director wanted anamorphic, and we had decided to go that way after we couldn't shoot on film, after we had shot some on film. But he didn't want like the weirdness of certain anamorphic lenses, like Mouthpiece is anamorphic, but very messy lenses that we like embraced every messy element of them. They were Hawk anamorphics, and parts of the lens don't even ever get in focus if you're wide open on the lens. So we were like loving it and embracing it, and he didn't want that. So we ended up going with master anamorphics, which are like super clean. We didn't want there to be those, you know, bendy sides and things like that. So it kind of just depends on the story and the project itself. But yeah.
Yeah. I also, it's funny because I feel like the movie I was just on, we tested so many lens packages and we're like, you know, talking them through and like, how do you respond to them emotionally? But I feel like you're either going with mistakes or against them. And so you're kind of always like trying to guide them down the right path, or being like, well, this one, we can't do this in this space. Or like, you might not like it if this starts happening, or this lens, all the lenses have different color spaces, whatever. You're just constantly, and then at the end of the day, I'm just like, you know that you are in charge of how your film is going to be. Like, you know, we want it to look good, but no lens makes or breaks a movie. And if it does, it's not that good of a movie, you know?
Yeah.
Both of you have had experiences shooting your home cities and also like experiences shooting completely foreign places. So I was wondering, do you feel like when you're shooting in the place that you live, do you bring kind of a unique visual perspective to projects like that? And in what way is it different from shooting somewhere you've never been?
I don't know. I've had different experiences shooting in Toronto. I did a documentary a few years ago with a director from Sweden, but it was in Toronto. And I found that experience kind of amazing because she just brought like a new set of eyes to a city that I was very used to. And she was like very drawn to all the brutalist architecture that's in the city. And I'm aware of it, but I'm not looking at it in the same way because I'm so numb to it, I guess. And I feel like we really found so much beauty in the city and such a style that I wasn't anticipating, which was really amazing. With Mouthpiece, Patricia and I both have regrets because of scheduling. We wanted there to be like much more of a poetic ode to the city in certain shots. And then when you start to get down to the actual schedule of a film, it's like, right, we can't go to that spot and then that spot and then that spot that we've got like the exact perfect frame of. It's like, we can go to this area and find frames within it. So that's like logistics meeting creative. But I feel like it was fun to kind of embrace Toronto for Toronto in that film, because as Canadians, we so often are like trying to hide Canada.
Toronto for LA. That's my
yeah. And New York, like everybody, you know, people want to do it for New York, and you're like, it just doesn't really look like New York. Here's the one corner, you know, or here's like the two spots that we can successfully make look like another city. But
yeah, I mean, for me, the first couple films I did were not in New York, like features. So when I finally got a New York movie, it felt very significant for me to come back and finally shoot something big there. And, you know, I think it also, like, I've done New York movies where it's like, you do want a sense of iconicism. You do want that shot that is just like an indicator of where you are. And then other films that are like, let's make a film. I feel like people don't know that Madeline's Madeline is a New York movie. Not that it matters necessarily for that one, but you know, it's very more like a person who actually lives in the neighborhood and less about the city and the interaction with most things in the city. But for me, it's just, you know, what is it that you're trying to tell an audience about a space? And I think, you know, I love shooting in New York. New York comes with a lot of problems. It's like any town, you kind of get to know the shooting style. It's like, I know who's going to walk by and yell. I know who's going to walk by and ruin a shot. Going to not care and literally not look at us. So I don't know. I mean, New York's a very fun place to shoot, so it feels, but also when you're at home, it's a very different shoot, at least for me. Like when I'm traveling, I feel like I'm such a weird tourist of sorts, and so you really like eat the culture of a space very differently than when it's your home. But yeah.
Was it fun to do Broad City in New York?
I mean, Broad City's so low budget. Like, you know, their way of shooting never really grew that much. So it's like you're working in real locations constantly. We didn't have, our G&E list is like this big. And so you're really working with the elements a lot. There's one episode where we shot it on the Brooklyn Bridge, like the final episode.
Yeah.
And that might be my most, like, I screamed at passerbyers that day because everybody knows them now. So it's like you're shooting like and we had to shoot it all on a Steadicam going over the bridge, and no, you couldn't put a stand down, you couldn't put wheels down. So we had to walk on every single piece of gear, and we had to get like multiple key grips to just hold the Steadicams and 2 Steadicam operators to like switch off along with traffic. I'm having like sweats. But you know, you get people who are like walking by and they see the girls and they're like, yes, queen, yes. And I'm like, you just ruined the fucking shot. Get out of here.
If you love the show so much, you would get the fuck out.
Yeah, you wouldn't ruin my shot. And I was like, oh, buddy, I gotta relax. But that was, you know, yeah, New York is great though. It's like half the people care and half the people couldn't give less of a care, you know? Right.
Did you guys shoot the episode where the birthday one or whatever, that's all on cell phones?
Yeah, that was like my piece de resistance. When I read it, I was just like, we have to do this on cell phones. Otherwise and I've tried to get the girls to operate as much as possible. Like we had operators around, and like I built a weird rig because it had to be 4K. So it was like I built like a dual camera rig so that they could kind of selfie cam and see sort of an approximation of what they're doing, and then still record with a loose lens. But yeah, that one was so fun because they're so intuitive on social media. So it was really about like being like, no, I can do this like a perfect zoom, but that's not what's fun about this. Like it has to have a sense of it sounds so stupid to be like, not an uncultured hand, but like not mine. Like I'm thinking about framing constantly, and I just want to like
Yeah.
give ease to their
Yeah.
presence on social media, and I love that.
Yeah, that was a very fun episode to watch.
I was like, I mean, I think it's, for me, cell phones have enabled so many people to tell their own kinds of stories. And especially, you know, I'm not on TikTok, but I really appreciate what kids are doing on TikTok visually and how they're telling stories and learning to do that. And that's why cell phones to me are so cool. I'm like, you know, it was problematic shooting on them that much, but I think, you know, especially when I talk to students, I'm like, you have a camera in your pocket, you can go make anything.
Yeah, I definitely did not have that when I was starting out.
No.
I guess now I'll turn it over to Alex and the viewer questions.
Okay, so we had a question from Giori, which is that says, I'm in a film production program and don't know what to specialize in. I feel like cinematography is the most creative and exciting position, but also very technical. Was there ever a time you had imposter syndrome and didn't feel prepared to work on a project?
I kind of always feel like I have imposter syndrome, but
I mean, listen, we all kind of know cinematographers are kind of the cool. They are always like, DPs are like the rock stars of the film set because you just kind of whatever. But I would say like every position on a film set can be creative, and you know, I think production designers are vastly under-celebrated in our cinematic culture because most good production design people don't recognize as production design because they just think that it was there. That's like the plight of the modern production designer. But, you know, imposter syndrome, sure, all the time. I feel like if you're not in over your head and not thinking like you don't have a clue of what you're doing, then maybe you're not doing it right. Like you kind of have to push yourself out of your comfort zone. But, you know, I think film school is a great place, a safe environment to try out many roles on set. And the reality is like, I tell people if they want to be cinematographers, like it is hard work. It is emotionally hard. It is hard on your relationships. It's hard to have a life. It is incredibly difficult and incredibly hard. So, and it's physically and emotionally draining. So like you really have to sign up for it if you want to go for it, because it's not, yeah, sometimes you get to do like a cool one-off job where you're like hanging out on an island shooting whatever. But most of the time it is incredibly difficult work. And so, it, you know, you kind of have to go put yourself in different positions and see where you think you want to be.
Did you start doing something else on set or did you just start as a cinematographer?
I was also an AC for, you know, when I moved down to New York, I AC'd as well. But I very quickly realized like I could have joined the union as an AC and then I would have been making a lot of money doing something I didn't want to be doing. So instead I just kind of slummed it and made ballet workout videos for a woman for years. So like I just bring a hard drive and edit on my days off to make rent. But yeah, I mean, there was no other option for me, I think.
Yeah.
What happened for you?
I worked in lighting. I did like a little bit of camera assisting, but did a little bit more lighting, and then joined the union as like a lamp op, but never worked at union day because I quickly was like, no, I don't want to go down the hole of getting in there too far. And I was shooting at the same time, like all the free stuff and things with friends. And Alex, I know you were like, Patterns trilogy, like I was doing that at the time, which was like, so you know, scrappy films with friends. But but it was nice to be on sets in another capacity and to kind of learn from other people. I remember sort of like a point though when I was doing the lighting, and I at first was working with people I really liked, so I was kind of learning with them and they felt like peers, and we were you know, I was learning about lighting that I liked. And then I went on to like stuff where I was working on, like I did an MOW as a lamp op, and I basically was just like, I don't want to watch this. I don't want to watch how it's being done, because I don't want like to learn this way. I don't want shit goes in, shit comes out. You know, like had this weird fear that I was going to learn bad habits from being on those sets. But I don't think that's really the case. I think it was like nice to kind of see how different people do things, and also to like experience sets how you want them to feel and to run as well, you know.
Yeah, I think being a crew member is really important. Like when I work with a director who's literally never crewed, I can always tell because of the way that they talk to people and the way that they approach crew members or PAs or anybody. And for me, I'm like, if you're on my crew, you are being paid, hands down. And also, like, I don't tolerate mistreatment of my crew. And for me, that comes from like, you're setting the tone from like the top down. And yeah, like working on terrible productions where I was, you know, really mistreated and screamed at and not being paid really taught me that, like, you know, the only way that the industry changes is through us changing it.
Yeah, 100%. I worked with, Mouthpiece, the director, Patricia. She's a seasoned director. She's been around forever in Canada. She's like paved the way for a lot of us. So it was cool to work with her. But one thing I like immediately saw and was just like blown away was that she like introduced herself to every person that stepped foot on set and was like, what's going on with you? And, you know, like 3 days in, one of my grips left because his wife was having a baby. And she was kind of like, where's John? And I'm like, he's not here today. She's like, oh yeah, because he had to go. His wife was having a baby. I'm like, how did you find the time to even know this? You know what I mean? And it means a lot to people on set. I feel like the camaraderie and the spirit of that set, everyone felt creatively involved, and that's super nice. That's so special. You don't want people there with like fear.
I know. I shot second unit on Knives Out, and Ryan Johnson is like by far the best director I've ever seen work. He just has such a grasp on exactly what you're talking about. It's like, you know, talking to crew and really enabling your crew to enjoy the process and to really get excited about a film. And you can feel that the crew was behind him on that film and they loved working with him. He's just such a generous, kind person. And like, yeah, it means that your crew is more activated.
Yeah. It's cool. It's like, I hope that that's the trend of things, because I think the old way of like complete asshole tyrants is hopefully going away.
It's got to. Social media, baby.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. Everyone's on set with like a video camera and recording it. So yeah.
I mean, when I talked to Patricia about Mouthpiece, one of the things she was saying is because the crew was basically almost all women, that she felt like it was just a no bullshit set. Like she didn't have to stroke people's egos. And I guess I'm just wondering if that sort of resonates with you, or like your experiences with that.
Stroking egos? Oh, I'm very good at that, baby. I mean, it's part of the job. I mean, you know, I think for me, one thing I love about working with women, but anyone can inhabit this space, but I feel for me, I'm kind of about radical honesty, and I don't feel bad telling somebody that I don't have the answer. And a lot of people that I work with feel like they're in a safe position to express that. Like working with Desiree on Cameron Post, you know, it was Desiree's first time not being in front of the camera and directing. And so it was really about like giving her the tools to feel powerful with blocking and like what it means to position people a certain way. So, you know, we were very collaborative on that front. And I remember the AD kind of being like, you're overstepping your bounds. And I was like, this is something that Desiree and I have talked about, something that she desires in a collaborator in this capacity. And like, I remember 2 weeks later, he kind of saw us working and saw Desiree like really find her bearings. And it was like, oh, I see it now. I see exactly what you guys were doing. And like, I love this. Like, we like brought him to like the female side or something. But he didn't get it. I was like, no, I was like, sometimes directors can say that they don't know.
Yeah.
That's okay. And you know,
well, I think sometimes those create the best sets when you are able to say, I don't know. And I mean, in our positions too, like when I first was on a giant soundstage with sets and there, you know, you're figuring out how you're going to light that, I realized it's not me, like it doesn't help me to pretend I know everything there, but
exactly.
it helps to be like, I don't know, here's what I do know, here's what I want, here's what I'm looking for. Now, like you guys, Key Grip, Gaffer, you guys help me, tell me how things can run, the options that we have. And I think that helps. I think that helps sets, and I think it helps people, feel a sense of ownership and feel like they're involved in the process in a rewarding way.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we've started some questions about music. One is, if you're working on a music video, are you consulting with the musicians? And I guess, like, similarly, when you're doing how often are you actually aware of what music you're working with in a film, and like, how does that affect the shots that you're putting together?
I love music videos. I grew up loving music videos. To me, while I'll do the occasional commercial, I don't find as much pleasure in doing commercials as I do doing music videos. And I think a marker of my work with musicians who've then gone on to self-direct or continue to work with me over like various directors, whatever. For me, I tend to work with a lot of females, but I always approach them because I think how you are viewed is so important to the way that your music is also consumed. And so when especially for women, you know, I say, how do you want to be viewed? How do you want to look? How is this signifying who you are as an artist? And let me help you get that. And so it's really a collaboration, because I think for too long, especially women, have kind of been fed a patriarchal form of how they should look, how a rock star looks, how anything looks. And for me, I'm always interested in subverting those ideas and creating new images for women, especially women in rock or women in music. And I want new iconographies. I want new mythologies. I want new images. I don't, you know, there's like it's just a subconscious feeling. It's like, you know, I can tell when somebody's not giving an artist power. And for me, it's always positioning myself on like how to empower them the most. And also knowing that like, for a lot of women, I'm like, how pretty do you want to look? Do you want me to beauty light you? And I have no problem with that, because at the end of the day, it's their vision, like their image out there connected to their music.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't do a ton of music videos, but I don't know. Yeah, sorry, I'm like sidetracked now, not thinking about music, but thinking about lighting people and for beauty and whatnot. But music for movies is interesting because you often just don't know beforehand. Some directors I work with do, or they want certain things, so you have it in your mind as a tone, but you never know if you're going to have that music in the end. And again, depending on a budget, often you can't have certain music. So.
I mean, you've done a couple musicals, I suppose, with like the Patterns trilogy, but also like a few scenes in Mouthpiece.
Yeah.
How was that experience?
That was fun. I mean, it's the creators of Mouthpiece, the two leads. also did all the music. One of them did all the music for the film. So she was kind of constantly a part of that process, and we knew that music obviously from the beginning. That was fun. I don't know, it was kind of fun to just play with like traditional musical tropes, but also put it into a modern space. And it was a weird, moment of surrealism. So it was kind of playing with what the feeling was and how we wanted to get there. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'm not answering this question very well. Sorry.
No, but I think, especially if you're speaking to like a genre like that, like the musical, there are ways of entering those spaces in any kind of genre work, especially for us, that are so fun because there are rules. And then if you know the rules, you can kind of break them and change them and reconfigure them into something new. And yeah, for me, it's like, I ask directors for playlists, emotional playlists, character playlists, whatever, just to kind of get in the head of like, when they're conceptualizing these things, what does that mean, and who is this person, and what is the tone? Like you said, it's tonal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did a lot. They did a lot for Firecrackers with the characters having playlists that we all had access to, which was amazing. It just gives you a sense of the world that you're in.
Exactly.
Well, we maybe have time for just like one last question. And so following up on what you guys are talking about sort of playing with conventions, I'm wondering where you had a question about sort of what is your dream project when it comes to like style and genre. And I'm wondering also, like you guys have worked in multiple genres and styles, and how do you think about engaging with those?
Well, it's such a hard question of what a dream thing is. I think I react very, I'm always like scared to stay still for too long, maybe in a certain style or a certain genre. So I'm always like reactionarily looking for something very different from the last thing that I just did. So it's like, depends when you ask me, like after doing Firecrackers, which was crazy handheld and loose and free, I really was like, I just want to put a camera on sticks and I don't want it to move, and I want dollies and control and everything to be controlled. And then after that, you're like, okay, what's the mashup of the two? Or I don't know. Right now, I'm like, it's hard to think right now during this pandemic time, I think a little bit of what kind of content I would want to create in an ideal world. I think it's always story driven more so than fully just the visual, but more and more the projects like a Mouthpiece or a Firecrackers, where I've worked with someone where the experience has also felt really amazing, and I feel like creative collaborations are happening and relationships with the people I'm working with feel special, as well as the product feeling special. That's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to do a Western. It's like, I grew up loving like Sergio Leone, like all these kind of Western heroes, and the iconography of a cowboy has always been something that I like playing with, especially for women. But it's such a trope, and I think it would be so fun to make an actual like, I don't want to be like feminist, but something dealing with women in those time periods, because I think like, we're used to seeing the male cowboys, and
it's true. Or you see the like the brothel women, I guess, of that time.
Exactly.
McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Do you know that film?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, I think that there's like, I think my desires extend more to like cinematic, or like the history of cinema and what women have been allowed to tell stories about. And that's sort of where I'm like, would want to rest, is like in a very male world, and like revisit those and, do something different.
Okay, well, I've been talking for about an hour, so I think we'll probably end it here, but I know that you guys are on social media if people want to find you there. Do you want to tell us what your handles are?
Mine is Brutes, Brutes, and that's my Instagram handle, which is probably the best place to find me. And then my name, Catherine Lutes. I have a website, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got a website. I don't know why you'd want to go there, but it's there. And then I'm on Instagram as Miss_Ashcon. MISS. But yeah, I mean, I'm not like a great, I mean, follow me, whatever, but like I'm not great. I'm not hashtagging, I'm not doing some shit on Instagram. I'm usually too busy to even think about it, but come on over.
Yeah, you can watch my ongoing story of the robins that are at my house right now.
I'll find you. Yeah, I'm better with the stories because I post so rarely, and it always feels so self-indulgent and so self-aggrandizing when you're like, I just want to say it's a pleasure, honor to like post this commercial that I shot. Like, thank you guys so much. Like, highest honors all around. I can't get down with that shit.
Yeah. Hashtag camera person, hashtag DOP, hashtag lady DP, hashtag.
So two of Catherine's films, which she's talked about, Firecrackers and Mouthpiece, they are featured in our ebook on Canadian cinema. It's called the 2019 Canadian Cinema Yearbook. And if you're watching this, then you can get a 20% discount if you want to buy the book with the coupon code lockdown2. And we'll also send you a follow-up email with this. It's good until Wednesday. Get the book at CanadianCinemaBook.com. And so we talked to Catherine's collaborators on that, and they all speak very highly of her, as well as a bunch of other great Canadian films. And next week, Orla, do you want to tell us what is coming up next week?
Yes, next week, I'm very excited about next week. We have two costume designers on, which is April Napier, who I've been a fan of for a long time. She's done Kelly Reichardt's two latest films, First Cow and Certain Women, and she did the costumes for Lady Bird and Booksmart recently, and we've talked to her recently for our upcoming book about Kelly Reichardt, and we're going to have her on live stream next week talking to Grace Snell, who worked on The Souvenir. So tune in. I think it's 4 p.m. ET next week.
Yeah, that's right.
When are we going to get The Souvenir too? Who knows?
You need to ask her.
My heartbreak of going into like pandemic quarantine mode was that the day they closed everything was the day I had the ticket to see First Cow at TIFF.
Oh no!
It's so good.
It's really good.
Like, I mean, Kelly's incredible, but like, it really, buckle up, everybody.
Mm-hmm. I was so excited, and then it was like everything was happening, and I was like, are we allowed to leave our house? And like literally that afternoon, TIFF sent out a email like, we're shutting down the theater.
I miss movie theaters.
I do too. Yep.
Well, thanks so much, Catherine and Ashley. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
And nice to meet you, Ashley.
Nice to meet you. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, guys.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye.